There is a question that many parents have quietly asked themselves. Why can a child laugh and talk with their friends for hours, but when they sit in front of their parents, they are left with only a few short replies? Whatever. I don't know. Nothing. I'm fine. The strange thing is that change rarely happens all at once. There is no loud explosion. There is no terrible argument. There is no specific day that anyone can point to and say, this is when everything started. It is more like a path being worn away by tiny drops of water, day after day, month after month, year after year, until one day the parents look back and realize the child they love most has built a world of their own, and they are no longer invited into it. And what hurts so many people the most? Many parents in that situation truly love their children with all their hearts. They wake up early. They work until late. They worry about tuition. They worry about their child's health. They worry about the future. They worry about every little thing. But somehow, that love never turns into closeness. There was a man who once shared his story during a family counseling session. He said his son was 17 years old. The two of them lived under the same roof. They saw each other every single day. Yet, there were moments when he felt he knew less about that boy than one of his classmates did. He knew which school his son attended. He knew his favorite foods. He knew his tutoring schedule. He knew his grades. He knew what time he went to bed. But he did not know what was weighing on his son's mind. He did not know what the boy was afraid of. He did not know who he was in love with. He did not know whether he was truly happy. I feel like I'm living beside a stranger that I love very much. That was what he said. And the entire room fell silent, because so many people realized it was not just his story. There is a strange paradox in family life. The people who are physically closest to one another are sometimes the ones who are the most emotionally distant. You can sit at the same dinner table, yet never truly understand each other. You can live under the same roof for 20 years, yet never know what the other person is crying about. You can spend your entire life sacrificing for your child and still leave them feeling alone. Why does that happen? Researchers in child developmental psychology have discovered something fascinating. What creates a lasting bond between children and their parents is not the number of hours they spend together. It is not the amount of money spent on them. It is not even the number of pieces of advice they receive. It is the level of emotional safety they feel when they are with their parents. In other words, deep down, every child is constantly asking themselves, can I truly be myself here? It sounds simple, but that question determines almost the entire future of a relationship. If the answer is yes, the child will open up. If the answer is no, they will begin to wear a mask. At first, the masks are very small. They hide a few thoughts. They cover up a few emotions. They stop telling a few stories. But over time, that mask grows thicker, until eventually, their parents can only see the version the child believes they want to see, not who they truly are anymore. There was a 23-year-old woman who once reflected on her childhood. She said, "When I was little, I was a very good child." At first, it sounded like something to be proud of, but then she continued, "I was so well behaved that nobody knew I was suffering." From a very young age, she learned that whenever she felt sad, the adults would tell her she was overthinking. Whenever she got angry, they would tell her she was being disrespectful. Whenever she felt disappointed, they would tell her she was too weak. So she chose the easier path. She stopped talking. She stopped sharing. She stopped asking for help. On the outside, she looked like the perfect child. On the inside, her world was slowly closing its doors. What is worth reflecting on is that many parents never realize this process is happening, because the child still studies, still eats with the family, still greets everyone, still goes about daily life as usual. From the outside, everything seems fine, but sometimes the most dangerous distance is not the one you can see. It is the distance that quietly appears inside the heart. It is where a child begins to believe, I have to become someone else before I can be accepted. That is when the real connection begins to disappear. And sadly, many families only realize it after the child has grown up. When they no longer need permission to go anywhere, no longer need to report everything they do, no longer depend on their parents. Only then do the adults panic and ask themselves, why does my child never confide in me anymore? But the truth is, no one stops opening up in a single day. People simply learn, little by little, to close the door after feeling rejected too many times. And the most heartbreaking part is, that process usually does not begin with huge arguments. It begins with very small moments, moments that neither parents nor children ever imagine are important. A sigh, a disappointed look, an unintended comparison, an interruption, a moment of ridicule, a moment of dismissal. Those things may seem insignificant, yet they can become the very first bricks used to build a wall between two generations. Mistake number 1. Only loving the easy-to-love version of your child. There is something many parents never say out loud, but their children still feel it. That everything becomes easier when they are well-behaved, when they are cheerful, when they get good results, when they act exactly as expected. At those times, the family is full of laughter. The atmosphere feels light. Everyone is proud of them. But what happens when the child fails, when they become irritable, when they lose their direction, when they become difficult to understand? Many children begin to notice a very subtle change. The look in their parents' eyes changes. The tone of their voices changes. Even their patience changes. And a child's brain is incredibly sensitive to those changes. They do not think, my parents are disappointed in my behavior. More often they think, my parents are disappointed in me. That is a huge difference. A study on the development of children's self-esteem found that what children fear most is not punishment. It is losing their connection with the people they love. When they begin to feel that love becomes fragile every time they make a mistake, they start living in a constant state of vigilance. They try to please others. They try not to make mistakes. They try to become the person everyone else wants them to be, and little by little, they lose the ability to understand who they truly are. There are adults well into their 30s who still ask for other people's opinions before making every decision. Not because they lack intelligence, but because, from childhood, they became accustomed to living for approval. They were never taught that they had the right to exist even when they were imperfect. That is why, sometimes, the most important thing a child needs to hear is not, you need to try harder. It is, no matter what happens, Mom and Dad are still here. It sounds simple, but to a growing heart, those words become the foundation of emotional safety. Mistake number 2, turning love into a never-ending improvement project. There is a kind of parent who is deeply devoted. They always want the very best for their child. They always want them to improve. They always want them to grow. It sounds wonderful, but sometimes the child feels as though they are living inside a construction site that is never finished. This grade is not good enough. That skill needs improvement. This habit has to change. That goal still has to be achieved. Every conversation revolves around what still needs to be changed, where they need to work harder, what else they need to improve. And then one day, the child begins to wonder, will there ever be a version of me that is good enough to be accepted? That is a painful question, because no one can grow in a healthy way if they constantly feel like they are a broken project that always needs fixing. Psychology calls this a lack of intrinsic self-worth. The child begins to believe that their value comes from achieving something, not from who they are. When that happens, success is no longer a source of joy. It becomes an obligation, and failure is no longer a lesson. It becomes proof that they are not good enough. Do you know what often happens to children like this when they become adults? They appear highly successful in the eyes of others, but they are often unbelievably harsh with themselves. Nothing ever feels like enough. They never feel worthy. They never feel they have earned the right to rest, because the voice in their head keeps repeating, "Try harder, be better, don't stop." And that voice is often formed very early in life. Mistake number 3. Confusing control with protection. Most parents do not control their children because they want to hurt them. They do it because they are afraid. Afraid their child will get hurt. Afraid they will be deceived. Afraid they will fail. Afraid they will suffer. Afraid they have not done enough. But there is a paradox. The more afraid people become, the more they want to control. And the more they control, the more trapped the child feels. And when a child feels trapped, they will begin looking for ways to reclaim their own space. That is why so many family conflicts are not really battles between right and wrong. They are battles between fear and the need for freedom. A teenage boy once said, "The hardest part isn't being managed. It's feeling like I'm constantly being suspected." That sounds very different, doesn't it? Many parents believe they are protecting their children. But what the child actually feels is a lack of trust. And no relationship can truly thrive when one person always feels they are being watched, because trust is like a muscle. If it is never given the chance to be used, it will never grow. Children need guidance, but they also need trust. They need boundaries, but they also need space of their own. Finding that balance is not easy, but it is exactly there that healthy relationships are built. Mistake number 4. Always wanting to be right. This is perhaps the most common mistake, and also the hardest one to recognize, because many parents do not do it intentionally. They simply believe they are teaching their children. But think back to the arguments that have happened in your family. Was the goal to understand each other or to win? There are conversations where, from the very first minute, neither side is truly listening anymore. They are only waiting for their turn to speak, waiting for their turn to prove that they are right. But the problem is, a relationship is not a courtroom. There does not always have to be a winner and a loser. Because when someone wins the argument but loses the connection with the person they love, was it really a victory? Years later, children often do not remember who was right, but they remember very clearly how they felt. They remember what it felt like to be looked down on. They remember what it felt like to be overwhelmed. They remember what it felt like to be misunderstood. And those feelings stay with them far longer than any argument ever will. There is something worth thinking about. The children who stay closest to their parents are not the ones who never made mistakes, nor are they the most well-behaved. They are the ones who feel, "I can bring even the imperfect parts of myself back home." That is what creates a real connection. Mistake number 5. Bringing old wounds into the way you raise your children. There is a truth that many people only realize after they become parents. Our childhood never truly disappears. It simply changes shape. It follows us into our work, into our relationships, into our marriage, and then into the way we raise our children. A father who grew up in a family where every mistake was criticized once told himself after becoming a parent, "I will never become like my own father." But then one day, his son accidentally broke a vase. He lost his temper. He raised his voice. He blamed the boy. And immediately afterward, he realized the voice that had just come out of his own mouth sounded exactly like his father's voice years ago. Not because he wanted it to happen, but because what is repeated again and again throughout childhood often becomes an automatic response, especially during moments of stress. That is why many psychologists say we do not raise our children based on what we believe. More often, we raise them through the parts of ourselves that have never healed. Someone who was abandoned often becomes controlling. Someone who was constantly judged often judges others. Someone whose emotions were always dismissed often struggles to accept other people's emotions, not because they are bad people, but because they were never shown another way. There was a mother who once cried during a counseling session. She said, "I always criticize my daughter because she worries too much. I tell her that she overthinks everything. I tell her that she is too weak." Then one day she realized those were the exact same words her own mother used to say to her. Even more surprising, she herself had lived with anxiety for more than 30 years. But instead of healing it, she unknowingly passed it on to her daughter. That is what happens in so many families. Wounds that are never dealt with do not disappear. They simply find someone else to carry them. And sometimes the greatest gift parents can give their children is not a good school, not a large house, not wealth. It is the courage to look honestly at themselves, the courage to admit, there are things I went through that should not continue into the next generation. Mistake number 6, teaching children to be strong by never allowing them to be weak. There has long been a common belief that if you want your child to become strong, you should never indulge their emotions. It sounds reasonable, but psychological research shows the opposite. The people who recover best from hardship are not the ones who were never comforted. They are the ones who were comforted in the right way. A child who is allowed to feel sad learns how to face sadness. A child who is allowed to feel afraid learns how to overcome fear. A child who is allowed to cry learns how to regulate their emotions. On the other hand, when every emotion is forbidden, the child does not become stronger. They simply become better at hiding it. There was a 16-year-old boy who had not cried in front of anyone for years. Everyone praised him. They called him resilient, mature, strong. But years later, during therapy, he admitted, "I don't know what to do whenever I feel sad. I just pretend nothing is wrong. That is not strength. That is emotional isolation, and many adults are living exactly that way. They do not know how to ask for help. They do not know how to say that they are hurting. They do not know how to admit that they are exhausted. Because from childhood, they were taught that emotions were something to hide. But emotions are not the enemy. They are signals. They are trying to tell us something important. And a child becomes truly strong only when they learn to listen to those signals, not when they learn to ignore them. Mistake number 7. Forgetting that connection matters more than control. One day will come. Your child will no longer be the little one who needs you to hold their hand while crossing the street. They will no longer need you to check their homework. They will no longer ask for permission for every little thing. Time always moves in that direction. And in the end, what keeps parents and children close to each other is not authority. It is the relationship. It is not fear. It is trust. It is not control. It is connection. Many parents spend years trying to manage their children, but they spend far too little time building closeness. It is like locking the front door as tightly as possible, while forgetting to build the kind of home that anyone would want to come back to. One day, when the door can no longer be locked, people finally realize that the most important thing was never the lock itself. It was the feeling of belonging. There are children who grow up, move out, go away for school, move far away for work, yet they still call home every single day. There are also children who live just a short distance from their families, yet they go for months without wanting to have a conversation. The difference is not the physical distance. It is the emotional experience. Was that home ever truly a safe place? That is the question that determines everything. Perhaps what makes me think the most is not the rebellious children. It is the children who quietly give up. The children who stop arguing, who stop explaining, who stop trying to be understood. Because when someone is still arguing, it means they still have hope. When someone is still explaining, it means they still believe the relationship can change. But when they fall silent, it is often a sign of exhaustion. There is a quote that is deeply worth reflecting on. The greatest distance between two people is not a difference of opinion. It is the feeling of no longer being heard. Many parents believe their children grow distant because of phones, because of social media, because of friends, because times have changed. Those things may be true to some extent, but deeper than that, human beings are always drawn to the places where they feel truly seen, truly understood, truly accepted. If a family can offer that feeling, a child will always find their way back home, even after they become adults, even if they travel very far away, even if life changes completely, because deep inside, every human being needs a place where they can simply be themselves, and perhaps that is the most beautiful gift a parent can ever create. Not a perfect child, not a flawless life, but a home where their child knows, I don't have to hide the vulnerable parts of who I am. I don't have to become someone else to be loved. I don't have to be perfect to be accepted. A place where after every failure, every wound, every worst day, there is still a door that opens, and someone ready to say, you don't have to prove anything. You just need to come home. Because in the end, what a child remembers forever about their family is not how big the house was, not the expensive gifts, not how much money their parents spent on them. It is the feeling of walking through the front door after an exhausting day, the feeling after making a mistake, the feeling when they are vulnerable, the feeling when they are no longer strong enough to carry everything alone. Is that place somewhere that allows them to be themselves? And if there is one thing that many adults wish they had heard when they were little, perhaps it is this. My child, whether today you succeed or you fail, whether you feel strong or completely worn out, even if you disappoint the entire world, here you will always be loved.